Hello, and welcome to the Prepare program and this journey that is called education. My name is Marquise Miller, and I will be speaking with you briefly about the importance of building relationships with your students. Just a little about myself. I was a pre-med student at UNCG, and I decided to try to teach for a year or two before going to medical school. But a funny thing happened during my first year of teaching. I actually fell in love with the process of teaching and learning. I had so many rich experiences in my class that I wanted to pursue it full time. And so I went back to school to get a master's in education and then another master's in leadership. And now I'm working on my PhD in educational administration. I've been an educator for 17 years now, teaching math and science to secondary students, and now an administrator beginning in 2016. One thing I learned about myself after leaving the classroom is that I really did not know how to properly build relationships with students. I didn't know how to initiate the process. And I believe I was spoiled in the classroom because a lot of the behavior issues that I dealt with as an administrator, I didn't face as a teacher, as a classroom teacher. Many of the issues that I would hear from some of my colleagues at other trainings or at PLCs, I just did not experience. So becoming an administrator and supporting teachers with certain behavior problems, I did not know how to properly respond. And I didn't understand why students would not comply with certain directives. And so I wanted to continue my training and my professional development. So my administration team was all trained on restorative practices. And we saw such a decrease in our numbers for discipline. We saw gaps closing as far as who was suspended more. We saw a decrease in the number of students that were repeat offenders. And I wanted to continue to learn more about restorative practices. I didn't want to just implement it. I wanted to learn how to teach others to implement it in their classes and in their schools. So in 2021, I became a national trainer for restorative practices. And that's why we are here today. During this time together, we will define restorative practices and identify what makes a successful student-teacher relationship. And we'll talk about some of those best practices in the classroom for student care by taking pride in our student relationships and our practices. You're going to learn to make sure students have something to work on as soon as they come into the room. A bell ringer, an opener, or a starter is what it'll be called. It's important that we spend a few minutes, though, to connect to students away from the curriculum. And here's one of my favorite openers for that reason. It's called a mood meter. And so it allows you to kind of gauge the room, read the room when it comes to presenting or teaching. I even use these now in my staff meetings just so I can know what I can keep on my agenda or what I need to skip through, what can become an email, or what we need to spend more time on based on the feelings in the room. So I know if the students are energized based on this opener and talking about it, or proud or hyper, I know that we need to have something hands-on so I can keep their focus and keep them engaged in the lesson. If they are worried about something or annoyed or restless, I'm able to gauge that as well and not be so punitive when students are distracted because things may be happening at home. But letting students know how you feel and that you care about how they feel really helps save your classroom. Most secondary classes will have about 90 minutes in class. So even if you have about 55 or 70 minutes in the class, if you spend about 5 or 10 minutes just asking them how they feel and really understanding how they feel, you will get a lot more bang for your buck. Students will see that you care about them as a person, and they won't spend the bulk of the class off task trying to talk about or whisper about the weekend or whatever's going on because you actually set aside and carved out that time. In class, they'll be more focused and you'll get more bang for your buck. And so let's jump right into it. So restorative practices. Restorative practices is all about building relationships. It's about being proactive versus reactive. So in that relationship building, you gain some intended and unintended consequences. There is a level of mutual respect that is established. There is a shared sense of responsibility from the students and the staff. And then there is repair done to any harm caused to the community, the classroom, or even individual relationships. And basically, restorative practices has the fundamental purpose of people being happier, more cooperative, more productive, and more likely to make positive changes to their behavior when the authority figures do things with them rather than to or for them. This picture is called the social discipline window. It measures the level of accountability against the level of support that is given to students when we need them to respond to a directive that is given. It's important to note that we are human, so there are times where we will visit all of these boxes. We're going to have bad days, we're going to have a tough situation. It's going to happen. We're human. But our jobs as educators is to model how to navigate through those hard times in those situations and how to return to and live in the restorative or the with box. There are times where it's necessary to be momentarily in each box. For example, there are times I have to be punitive. I may not have time to explain to a student why I need you to run outside if the building's on fire, and you're in the room right next to it, and it's right next to the generator and it could blow at any second. I just need you to run or to move because there is a snake crawling beside your leg. I may not have time to give you the why. I will say most of the time, especially through my trainings with restorative practices, that the why can be more important than the what to students who are getting directives from adults. Where you live on that chart will determine what your student-teacher relationships really look like. Do students feel welcome in your class and invited in your class? Do they feel like all you do is bark orders? Do they feel like you don't care? One of my favorite quotes is from John Maxwell that says, students don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And it is our job to make our classrooms a safe space for students to be themselves, learn who they are, which in turn will help them with their learning style and how much they can intake from the class practices. So do my students know that I actually care about them? There are two things that will clearly let a student know if you care about them and their well-being. One of those things is how well you disseminate information to them and allow them to access the curriculum. That takes us right to Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's is going to drive your instructional practices and your professional development. Whether you're a 15-year veteran teacher or just starting your EdTPA, Bloom's taxonomy is the foundation of effective teaching practices. We start with remember, which will be definitions or multiplication facts, and we go all the way to create. This is effective learning where you are not only being analyzed or evaluated, you're able to create a product that lets us know you've learned the material and have fully accessed the curriculum. So the other part of that answer for knowing if students know that you care is not just making sure they can access the curriculum, but how you make them feel in the process. Do they feel a part of your classroom? Are they just visiting your classroom? Do they feel like they're a part of the learning process with you? And one of my favorite quotes is, in teaching, you can't do the Bloom stuff until you take care of the Maslow stuff, which takes us to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. When these things are met, students know that you care. Physiologically, students need food, water, and rest. They also need to feel safe when they come to school. The next level, they need to feel like they belong in the classroom. So relationship is very, very important. then their esteem can be built by how much they learn and the accomplishments they're making in the classroom. And that leads to their self-esteem being nurtured as well. As you can see, how will your students know that you actually care about them? By balancing Maslow's hierarchy of needs with Bloom's taxonomy in the classroom. Yes, we want students to know things, and we want them to have the bare minimum as far as food, water, and shelter. But we also want to climb both ladders, making sure students have high self-esteem about themselves and the curriculum, but also being able to be successfully evaluated on the formative and summative assessments within your classroom. So how do we reach that balance? We reach the balance between Bloom's and Maslow by taking pride in our classroom experiences. I've used the acronym PRIDE for years to coach new teachers and to do trainings and professional developments on classroom management supports so that the teachers feel empowered in creating that shared space, but the students also feel like they're a part of the classroom and the processes every day. Prepared should be a non-negotiable when it comes to classroom teaching. There's a lot of planning that goes into the process of having a good lesson. And I don't mean just submitting your lesson plans. I've seen several teachers submit immaculate lesson plans, but not actually do what's written on that immaculate lesson plan, and the students were suffering. And so proper planning prevents poor performance. Again, that does not just mean submitting lesson plans, but knowing what's on that lesson plan, thinking about what's next in the lesson and how to flow, considering the misconception questions ahead of time so that you can have answers for them, so you're not blindsided in front of the students. So when I'm prepared, I improve my teaching skills and confidence. When things in the lesson go well, I'm excited about it, and I did the planning for it, and so I'm confident about doing it for the next class or the next year. I also enhance my students' learning and performance. When I see the students are understanding my way of teaching or how I taught a particular lesson or concept, I build more confidence in that process, and I'm going to keep doing it. I also don't waste time when I plan effectively. Oftentimes, lessons have to be modified. Sometimes students will get a concept very quickly. You've allowed 30 minutes for it, and they got it in 10 minutes. So you have to plan effectively to be able to use your time wisely. And you have fewer discipline issues. When your lesson is packed with instruction and learning, students don't have time to get in trouble. It's been my experience that most discipline issues come when there is a lack of planning. So you will hear your principal say bell to bell, teaching bell to bell, making sure you're using that time wisely and effectively. Fill that time with learning and instruction so that students don't have time to be distractions or get in trouble. Make sure you have routines in place. Surprises that are not positive will really mess up a lesson for that day and the processes for the class. So make sure you have clear and defined routines in class. I would also say make sure your students are a part of the process of defining and outlining what the expectations are for class. This makes it easier to hold the students accountable because they had a voice in the process of defining those routines. Make sure you often and explicitly teach the routines and review them daily. I usually ask teachers to make sure they spend the first day or two reviewing the processes and procedures. How do I get up when I need to sharpen my pencil? How do I ask for a pencil? Where do I turn in my homework? Those little things matter. But having those processes and routines in place will make it second nature for the students, and it's one less barrier they have when it comes to actually learning the content. Practice, practice, practice those routines so again they become second nature. Make sure you are providing positive attention to the students that are doing what is expected. So I thank you, Sally, for sitting in your seat and raising your hand before getting up. Thank you, Johnny, for turning in your homework. Thank you, Group 2, for being on task and your rich conversations. So those words go really far, and you'll see other students start to conform to get the same praise. Lastly, provide some visual prompts in the classroom. So if you decide on the rules together as a class and the consequence together as a class, make sure they're posted on an anchor chart on the wall so that students can see them and be constantly reminded of their expectations. I will say that this one is usually easier for elementary teachers, and secondary teachers 6 through 12 usually forget this, but you will get so much return on your investment if you provide incentives. Incentives increase appropriate behaviors in the classroom. They increase motivation for students who are normally not motivated. They increase the joy for students coming into your classroom, being excited about what they're going to learn today and what they could potentially get. It boosts self-esteem because with that increased motivation comes more completed work and improved results on tests, assignments, and other assessments. I will say it is possible to overuse incentives. Please make sure you balance when and how you use incentives. Do not use them as bribes. Although bribes and incentives, there's a thin line between the two. Do not cross that line into bribery. There is and can be increased pressure on a student who is not understanding the concepts and see everyone around them getting candy or getting an incentive and they haven't earned it yet. There can become an addiction to the incentive and not the learning process, and then using it too much could devalue what the incentive's intent is. Here listed are a few reasonable rewards that can be given out without costing you really any money. I will say that one of my favorite ones is not listed, but it is amazing what a 7th grader or even a 10th grader would do for a Jolly Rancher at the end of class. I really like number 10, which is doing half the assignment. So if a student is really engaged, answering questions, understanding the concept, and the homework assignment is 10 questions, I have no problem allowing that student to only do 5 questions because they've been proven in the classroom through formative assessment that they understand the concepts and don't need as much practice. Lastly, I would say allow students to choose what motivates them. There may be some incentives that you hadn't thought about that will motivate students to work above and beyond in the class for a particular concept based on what they told you motivates them. I want to be clear about this one, that having discipline is very important, but it's not the same as applying or providing discipline. I believe that over time in public schools we have misused and mislabeled the word discipline as a response to choice, but discipline, the actual definition, is the ability to train yourself to do something controlled and habitual, which means to make it a habit. And it is our job as educators to model the proper application of discipline so that you don't have to spend so much time responding to negative discipline issues. So teach your students in your class through your classroom practices what consistency looks like, which would be in this case a synonym for the applied discipline. Lastly, teach your students that every day is a new day. Give them the grace to start over. Again, we're all human and expect grace from our leaders, our direct supervisors, and so we should model and give that same respect and grace to our students that come in the next day. We should practice not carrying yesterday's offense. I know that Johnny really got under your skin yesterday, but today he honestly may not even remember it. And he should be greeted with a good morning or good afternoon, depending on when you see him, regardless of the offense that happened the day before. Everybody deserves a fresh start, and school is the best place to model what having a fresh start and that being accepted looks like. So we have to model that reset. Yes, little Johnny really had a rough day yesterday. Put his head down, wouldn't do any work, was very disrespectful to me, and hit little Sally with a paper ball. Well, today's a new day. If they came back into the classroom, we have to give them a clean slate. Another very important point that I like to give is Q-tips, and everybody needs them. And Q-tips is another acronym that stands for quit taking it personal. We have to learn how to depersonalize when dealing with young people, simply because their frontal cortex is not fully developed. And so honestly, while we have to teach them how to act and respond, we can't hold them accountable to the correct response yet because they may not know. The same way we are teaching them curriculum and how to access those standards, we have to teach them how to behave as well. It is actually vital that they learn how to act and respond from the teachers that they spend the most of their day with. So quit taking it personal. The response may not be personal. Little Johnny's lights could have been turned off last night and he didn't eat, so he's frustrated in class. Someone may have had a death in their family and they're not going to be focused. And it could just be that they are human and are not having a good day. We are entitled to those. We have to give them a chance to start over on the next day and not hold them hostage to whatever happened the day before. So how do students know that we care about them? By implementing restorative practices in our classrooms. The goal of restorative practices is to make sure that we are building healthy relationships between teachers and students. We also want to reduce the amount of repeat offenses and offenders that we have. Remember, we're human, so things are going to happen. We're going to have bad days. We're going to make mistakes. But how we come back from those mistakes should be modeled by the adults. And hopefully those practices put in place will prevent students from making the same mistakes twice and 3 times and 4 times. We also do this by taking pride in our classroom practices and our relationships with our students, by being prepared, establishing routines together, providing incentives that were picked by the students, modeling what discipline looks like by coming and being consistent, and showing what grace looks like by letting students know that every day is a new day. Here are some resources that you can use if you'd like more information on how to implement restorative practices into your classroom. I'm very passionate about making sure students and teachers have the best experience possible in the 180 days, give or take, that they are together, not only to access curriculum effectively, but also for all parties involved to grow as educators and learners. If you have any questions or would like to contact me, below is my information. Welcome to the Prepare program, and thank you for choosing a profession that's going to grow our future leaders. Best of luck to you.